Shalom. This week we are finishing the book of Exodus. Sefer Shemot draws to a conclusion. We read last two Parashiot together, as in many years. This year we read Vayakhel and Pekudei together. And as Vayakhel begins, very unusual scenario, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses assembles the entire nation of Israel, and he instructs them in two things, commands them in two areas of their lives, Shabbat and the building of the Tabernacle. And these two things are really nothing less than devices that will aid the children of Israel in transcending the boundaries, the borders of ordinary experience. Both Shabbat and the Tabernacle are all about living with God in this world past the boundaries of the limitations of ordinary time and space. And we've spoken about this before. Now, the first Parshat Vayakhel, is really the actual execution, the actual accomplishment of all of these mitzvot that we've been reading about earlier, that were first being commanded. All in all, fully half of the whole book of Exodus is completely taken up with the Tabernacle. 5 Parshiot, Truma, Titzaveh, Kitisa, Vayakhel-Pekudei. So Vayakhel is really now the recording of the actual execution of everything that was given over as a commandment, and Pekudei is the final reckoning, the perfect reckoning, that every detail was fulfilled, that everything was used properly, that everything went to its proper designated location, and everything was above board and accomplished exactly. But ultimately, after 3 Parshiot about this subject, and now another 2, when ostensibly a surface look doesn't seem to reveal very much new here, everything is always about how you look at it. So these 2 Parshiot, superficially, might seem to have very little new information to offer. There's so much detail here, and it becomes, redundant to a lot of folks. A lot of people are going to be very bored when they hear, again, another rendition of the tremendous specifics involved in the establishment of the Tabernacle. Some people won't be listening. Some people will find it a convenient time to take a break, put their head down, or maybe even text, depending on the situation. So everything is really how you look at it. But one thing that we can realize just from the sheer abundance of the space that this entire subject occupies in the Torah, without looking into the deepest explanations, without looking for all sorts of nuances and the metaphysical symbolism of what's going on here, on our own, we already know that this must be extremely important. The tabernacles and the commandments occupy so much space in the Torah that obviously, no matter how you look at it, this is the heart of everything. And actually, we learn on the deepest level that it's the heart of creation. And it's also like the heart of all of Israel. Certainly, when we look at that awesome iconography of the nation of Israel exiting from Egypt and dwelling in the desert, centered, totally focused, totally around the tabernacle, surrounding the tabernacle, it becomes like the heart of the nation. And even later, when the tabernacle was replaced by the Holy Temple on Mount Moriah for all time, again, this is the pulsating, beating heart of the nation of Israel, and all the nation makes the pilgrimage to the Holy Temple 3 times a year. This is, in the body of Israel, the center. And actually, if it's the heart of Israel, and we know that on the level of a cosmic rectification, and even a simple metaphor, we know that it's really also the heart of creation. It also plays a very prominent place in Hashem's heart as well. And in fact, when we go to the second parsha of our two parshiot of this Shabbat, Parashat Pekudei, and we read again what can seem to be a dry reckoning, almost like a collection of the invoices and the delivery receipts of everything that was involved in building the tabernacle. But when we come to the conclusion of the parsha, beginning from chapter 40, and we begin to read about the actual erection of the tabernacle, and of course there's a 7-day period in which the tabernacle was being dedicated, and finally on the first day of the first month, on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the tabernacle is dedicated, and that's the day really that time begins with. That's the day that was the first day, as it were, that the Shekhinah had a place to dwell in this world, the first day of the divine service. And we read there in the end of Parashat Pekudei of Hashem commanding Moshe to place everything in its proper place, and then how Moshe took and placed the testimony into the ark and inserted the staves on the ark. He placed the cover on the ark from above, and we read on, he put the table in the tent of meeting. He placed the menorah in the tent of meeting. He placed the gold altar in the tent of meeting. He emplaced the curtain. He emplaced the laver. He erected the courtyard. And then, finally, the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of Hashem filled the tabernacle. And the feeling that we get from this is so similar to the feeling that we get when we read about the Genesis narrative, the first 7 days of creation. And indeed, the 7 days of the inauguration of the tabernacle clearly parallel the original 7 days of creation, because this is, in a way, the completion, the crowning achievement and the crowning glory of all of creation. Now that Hashem has a place in this world, is welcomed into this world. And the truth is, another thing that we really learn from the seeming redundancy of these parshiot, again, the 5th Torah portion out of 10 in the book of Exodus, so completely centered on the tabernacle, and maybe really the only thing in our generation that we really need to understand is the fact that they really did it. There were no excuses. There were no tragedies of self-pity or self-doubt or theological or philosophical or ethical or political impediments. Am Yisrael, the nation of Israel, just did it because Hashem commanded it. And speaking of heart, if this is Israel's heart and the heart of creation, and something that obviously so occupies a prominent place in Hashem's heart. Speaking of heart, that's certainly something in these parshiot that we've been hearing a great deal about. In fact, not since the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, about which the Torah bothers to mention a whopping 15 times, not since then have we, and not again afterwards either, shall we be hearing so much about heart. The wise-hearted men and women are mentioned 8 times. The generous-hearted are mentioned twice, and those whose heart inspire them, literally who are lifted up by their hearts, they're mentioned twice. So we might be wondering, where else in the Torah is the quality of heart a factor or a requirement? What are the other mitzvot in which the factor, the quality, the presence of a heart, a wise heart, a generous heart, an inspiring heart, what other mitzvot have this requirements? And the answer is none. Specifically. But when it comes to loving and fearing and serving Hashem, heart is mentioned quite a few times. So, that must mean that this whole centerpiece, heart, of the Torah is tantamount to, is the vehicle for, is equal to, is an expression of loving and serving and fearing Hashem. The only other times in the entire Torah when we're even told about the quality of our hearts, but for no other specific commandments is heart required. So what is this aspect of heart? We have a few expressions here. We have this nadav. Nadav, it means to contribute, to donate. And actually, linguistically, this word, nun daled vav, nadav, to contribute, it's related to notef, which means to flow from within. So someone who is nadiv is a person whose actions arise solely from the dictate of their own inner self, free and totally independent. And nadiv lev, a person who is generous of heart, and these are the people who were instructed to give. These are the people who came forward. These are people who Moshe was instructed to speak to. Every person who is of nadiv lev, of a generous heart, that is referring to free will, something that's completely voluntary and not influenced by others. Nadiv libo, which is an expression that we find someone who is moved by his own heart only. There's no compelling or external influences here whatsoever. Wow. No wonder the Torah places such an emphasis and takes such issue with this quality of heart when it comes to those who executed and financed the building of the dwelling place for God, because obviously it wasn't everyone. It's not a call that's responded to, or maybe it's not a call that's even heard by everybody, because there are those who are influenced by others, by third parties, by external factors. They're not going to get it. Their hearts are not flowing. But those who are in touch with themselves, enough for their hearts to speak to them, to the extent that they would welcome God to be a part of this world, those are the ones that the Torah is singling out. And as we read these two seemingly redundant parshiot this week and bring the book of Exodus to a close, the greatest lesson of all for us in our time is the simple fact that they did it. These same wise-hearted, flowing, uplifted hearts are the ones who will heed the call to support and build a sanctuary for the one true God in our generation as well. Sunday, March 25th, 2012. It's the third annual International Temple Mount Awareness Day.